Welcome to PowerUp podcast, the podcast that seeks to empower and dismantle, giving us the power and confidence to question, deconstruct, rebuild, and expand in life. I'm your host, AmaRouge, voiceover and multidisciplinary artist, well-being advocate, food and book geek with over 14 years of movement-centered experience.
I am your host, Mesma, artist, choreographer, yogi and coach with a passion for alchemy, creativity, transformation and workplace wellness.
We recognise that we can't dismantle and empower or be empowered without first learning ourselves, diving deeper to unlearn the harmful, restrictive and unprogressive. It's an ongoing practice and journey for us all, which is why we created this podcast.
Our show features guests doing the work to enlighten, deconstruct and power up in their own magical ways.
We're going to be having conversations around the power of healing, transformation, well-being and creativity, and how they feed our personal and collective evolution, how they help us power up.
Oh my God, we have Ffion in the house.
Doing podcasts with bestest friends is just the best.
It definitely is. Ffion, pronouns she, her, or they, them, is an artistic director and producer. Ffion is a multidisciplinary artist and associate director of House of Absolute. Sound and film producer, composer, instrumentalist, singer, poet and dancer, born and raised in Wales. Ffion is a Welsh-speaking, non-binary woman of mixed Welsh Grenadian heritage and completed their degree at the London Contemporary Dance School and the California Institute of the Arts in 2013. Welcome!
Welcome, Ffion.
So lovely to be here. Thanks, guys.
It's so cool. I love this. People who know me or know Ffion or know Ella, oh my God, basically, if you know any of us, you'll know that we're all friends and we're all connected in many, many ways. So this is just like a jamboree of juiciness. And I'm doing everything I can to like hold it down and not go into like ridiculous like hyperactivity mode.
And plus, not even just in this lifetime, we've got like past lives together. We go
Yeah.
way back.
Yeah, so many. It's so true.
Yeah,
So many layers.
yeah.
And here we are, which is amazing. And Ffion kindly agreed to come on to the show and discuss all things gender identity with us, which we're so grateful and happy that you said yes. To start, and also for our listeners, we wondered if you'd be happy to define yourself and maybe talk a little bit about how you feel about defining yourself. And also within that, what does having they, them pronouns mean to you?
Firstly, I just want to say thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here and also to speak on topics that I'm really passionate about, and also being able to express myself with you guys. It's an honor. So I like to define myself with the places that I am born and the cultural regions within my family. And so I usually say I'm Welsh, and Welsh speaking, and I'm born and raised in Wales, and I'm mixed Grenadian because my mother's family are originally from Grenada. But within all of that, there's a great mixture of a lot of other continental and geographic places in my family. But for me, it's really important to have those as anchors because I really like specificity. And I think that it's really important in this day and age to be specific because language ends up being problematic sometimes if it's left open to other people's interpretations.
Yeah.
And having said that, though, I like the openings that is provided with they, them terminology. So there's a bit of contrast there, being specific, but also using language that also allows ambiguity, because I think that balance is really important. I am all the things that you have both introduced me as in terms of my work and my career and the different disciplines that I use and work through in collaboration and performance work and producing. And my pronouns are she, her, they, them. And for me, it's a lot to do with honoring my experiences being in a female identifying body, but also giving room for different expressions that are often not understood or not recognized because I'm in a female identifying body, and they're expressions that are not necessarily in the constructs of female constructed behavioral norms that we have in this society. So I like having both pronouns of she, her, and they, them, because it allows me to feel connected in different ways depending on the spaces that I'm in. And I do feel that specifically like with they, them, it's really empowering because it allows me to disarm things that I find quite disturbing or violent towards my being, which are assumptive ways of being treated and assumptive language, which I find undermining because of historical socializing of women. And assumptions that, sometimes I'm in a space where someone thinks I don't know as much because of my gender.
Yeah.
Both the way that I'm spoken to because of literally being she and her. But when I'm able to hold a space where I'm they and I'm them, and that plurality and that versatility and that ambiguity actually disarms conventional, assumptive, psychological ways that people would associate to me. They're then sort of unable to actually understand how to continue that way of communicating, because literally being they and being them really does draw in so many other energies into that expression and that presence that you occupy as soon as you announce your pronouns.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting. I feel that it's also a method and an approach to psychology. It's very interesting in terms of then how you use that to give yourself more permission to express more layers of yourself that often becomes quite a fight or a battle if you're only occupying in a she, her, a heterosexual psychological space.
That was so well put. You gave me goosebumps.
I find that it's quite frustrating if you are trying to make adjustments, but you're in a she, her expression. It's often considered disruptive, and you're a problematic person, or your personality is problematic, or you're not following the conventional unspoken rules of socialization, which is that this is how we behave in conversations. According to your gender, this is what you say and this is what you don't say, and this is how you do things in the physical space according to gender. But as soon as you don't do those things and you're still in she and her, then you're a problem. But if you they and them, actually it completely diffuses all of that because you're an anomaly to the binary equation. And I like to think of it as like algebra. You're the letters. You've got the 5 and you've got the +6 -7, and then divided by X,
Yeah, right.
divided by, P equals, and then they're like, "Oh, okay, hang on." It's like, yes, now you have to connect to who I am as a person. That means then you can decipher my value based on how you actually connect to me as a human being. Whereas, you know, often people get to bypass who you are as a human being because they can just attach themselves to their idea, yes, of how they categorize you, whether that's politically or sexually, and all the politics.
So well explained.
I mean, podcast finished, done. Bye, guys. We'll see you next week.
And I wanted to ask, working in this way or choosing, because this feels like there's an aspect of activism in it. What has been, or can you share with us maybe a positive moment or an experience where kind of using they them pronouns has kind of affirmed this ability to actually disrupt a situation where maybe you felt boxed in or stereotyped or maybe unsafe, or can you think of an example of a time when you're using your pronouns has allowed you to have an affirmative experience or change a situation that might have been negative?
Yeah, I think for me at the moment, because it's all still unraveling for me quite gradually and very ever so subtly. I wouldn't say my examples are maybe as extreme as other people in the community who could maybe give a more dynamic example. But for me, the way it's been empowering has been on a very subtle level in terms of my unconsciousness and my subconsciousness, and also then how just in the non-verbal realm, like when we're occupying space with different people, as soon as you are able to introduce yourself with your pronouns in a room, I feel like that in itself really sets the premises of your vibration for that. And it's kind of like after that point, everything is set in accordance to that definition. And it's not necessarily the words you're speaking or what you're doing after that point. It's just the fact that your being has now been, it feels like a protection field, an energy field of information.
Yes, I love that.
That is then kind of anchored in your being. So when you're in that room, that's enough that you've just said, "Hi, my name's Ffion, my pronouns are they, them." And immediately people's minds are kind of going, huh? Wait, what does that mean? Wait, okay. Does that mean, and the list will go on in terms of what that unravels for them in their minds. But what it immediately does is it says, you now cannot treat me or assume me in this colonial, patriarchal, gender historical way. I'm no longer in alignment with that game or that program. I'm not in that program. So find other ways to communicate with me. And I think obviously that's not black and white. Some people are still going to come towards me and say certain things because they just don't understand pronouns or the purpose of pronouns, and they're not there yet. But what it has done for me is it has allowed me to feel fuller in my expression. And it's also allowed me to access other parts of myself that usually I wouldn't allow myself to feel into, because I'm protecting myself. And I feel that if I'm not feminine enough, or if I'm not in enough of this kind of expression, I'm not valid, or I'm going to be rejected, or I'm going to be mistreated, or I'm going to be underestimated or undermined or disrespected. All of these things that we do to protect ourselves, it's like after that point, I'm like, everything is valid. All the expressions of myself are valid, and it doesn't have to,
removes that layer of restriction that can be there as well, kind of unconsciously.
and it doesn't have to be one end or the other end of the spectrum. I can now also be, femasculine. I can be anywhere within the entire spectrum of my expression.
Yeah.
And even like maybe somewhere that's off of a spectrum, do you know what I mean? Somewhere that's like, if we have a line, then maybe actually you're like over there, like this is masculine, feminine, and you're like in the universe somewhere that's like on a just whole other playing field.
But I think something that's like really been empowering is being with other people who also identify differently in their gender. Because actually that's where a lot of my learning has come from, because I think sometimes when I'm in my own understanding of what gender fluidity or non-binary means to me, obviously I meet people all the time who are they, them, and to them, and to every person that I meet who is they, them, it's a completely different understanding of what they, them means to them versus what it means to me. So I'm constantly learning as well what I can allow myself to be through my gender expression. And those are the moments where I am also undoing my own internal patriarchy, because I'm sometimes in the room with someone else who's they, them, and I'm like, oh, but they're wearing a dress today, but that so I'm allowed to also still be feminine in some type ways, but it doesn't mean that I'm being feminine anyway, because actually sometimes maybe it's the way that we're speaking is very, or sometimes, sometimes it's not even that literal. Sometimes it's not pinpoint. This aspect of me is this, and this aspect of me is that. Sometimes it's such a mixture, and that's really hard to allow, and it's also really hard to accept sometimes, because we're so conditioned that this way is this way and this, and it's like a palette of color paints, and it's like, well, you can't mix this with that because that doesn't color. And it's like, well, actually, what if all the colors actually makes a different point?
And actually that example is actually even as a metaphor, I know exactly what you mean. As a metaphor, it speaks volumes and it says exactly what you're articulating, but also as an actual example, I'm sure I've seen that play out with children, when they're just mixing colours, and teachers will say, oh, but that and that isn't a real colour. Why don't you do green with yellow, because that will give you, or red with this, because that's just going to make like a mush of colour that's not really nice. But and you see that, right? You see it actually literally as well. And that's another example of the conditioning from such a young age in an external experience.
It's making me think as well of that thing with kids where they're taught to colour within the lines, like not to go outside of the line. And again, like this beautiful possibility that comes to us as we unlearn those rules that we learn as children that are not helpful to our creativity. Because I wanted to ask if there's a connection, if you feel that there's a connection with your creative kind of expansion and your choice of pronoun.
That's such an interesting question. And I would definitely say yes, but I think in terms of how I probably would ponder on that for quite a while, because there's probably so much to it and many layers I'm even unaware of as well. But I think mostly what happens for me as an active artist is that I try to create things that are inside that only kind of create more sense once I get them out. And I think there's a lot of things that have been suppressed, not only in my family and not only in like our history in terms of how we're supposed to be, or how we're taught to be in society, but also in my childhood and with my parenting, and like how, parents influence you to not do this, but do this. And then you don't really know why. And sometimes that creates a lot of dissonance internally and builds up with societal things, with, the work industry, and how every voice from the outside is saying, don't do this or do this way, otherwise you're not this enough or you're not that enough. And so like internally it kind of builds up, and then I want to create something and go, well, actually, what if I put this with this, and I am this and I am a bit of that? What does that look like? And I think often I do that with fashion. I think with the creative work that I do, I think it's more specific in terms of like, I'm really like with a focal lens, kind of really picking out specific things and going, this really bothers me. Why does it bother me? Let's have a really close look at it. And then, a piece of work is made out of, for example, being sexual, or when I say being sexual, I mean the sexual visible expression of the female body, but in a masculine way. Why is that disruptive? And then kind of like creating work that looks at that, because everyone's happy to see a female body expressing sexually in a very typically vulnerable, sensual, feminine way. But why then is it disruptive when you see it in a masculine, primal way? The female body is still very attractive, it's still very desirable, the energy is still very sexual, but it's more primal, it's strong, it's powerful, it's grounded, it's even slightly grotesque, but it's still very sexual. But why is that not, as well seen?
Why doesn't it sit comfortably with people?
Yeah. And so there's certain things I like to analyze in my creative work, where I specifically look at certain things to understand more what that's about. But I think specifically in my fashion, I think I feel really closely affected by being able to have they, them pronouns. I think in the past, I just chose to dress the way I wanted to dress. And, I've often had a lot of conflict with getting dressed as an actual function, because I've felt that I'm constantly fighting with an internal patriarchy inside of me that's like, you need to have this percentage of sexiness and shape of your body. And then another part of me that's like, well, if I just wear baggy clothes, I won't be like respected, or, I won't be seen. But then there's another part of me that's like, I don't want to be sexualized. I want to be completely covered. And then all these voices in my head when I'm just trying to leave the house. I'm not trying to get anywhere important, but somehow that act of getting dressed becomes extremely political and quite tiring.
Do you ever feel any pressure based on how people assume you are, based off of having a female identifying body, outward personality? Do you ever feel any pressure around that to then kind of match their perception of you?
I think in the past, that was something that I was being controlled by other people's narratives, and it had a really strong influence on me. And I have had quite a few experiences where that no longer, literally, it can't exist in me anymore, because it's toxic and it's poisonous, and it literally, I can identify that energy so clearly that as soon as I feel someone's projection into me of what they think I should be, or how they want me to dress or be or speak or anything, I'm repelled, because I can't actually feel myself. So it doesn't affect me anymore in the same way. And what it actually does is it makes me have literally an allergic reaction to that. And then I want to kind of be even more confusing to them and be like, well, actually, now I'm going to completely...
Going to ramp this up 100.
Yeah, exactly. But I would say now I'm very much at peace with the decisions I make in terms of how I choose to present myself. And I take a lot of pride in mixing, I love wearing skirts over trousers with baggy, and having an energy of urban street, survival clothing, and tactical combat influence, with very cool more sort of culturally associated feminine blouses, or and it just is such a contrasting blend, and that for me feels really edgy, and that is how I feel inside. And so it's kind of, I feel really, really secure with my decisions now, and it's kind of anyone who feels any sort of way about me, I'm literally like, fuck you. It's got nothing to do with me.
Yeah. Yes. And as your friend, I can really say that that feels like you, like what you just expressed, as much as you can express it with the language that we have. That is how I experience you. And I love it. I love you.
Oh, I love you too.
So I know, and probably a lot of listeners listening to this know, that House of Absolute presented the show Warrior Queens at Sadler's Wells in May, which was phenomenal. If you didn't see it, sad times. Emoji with the straight lines eyes with the straight mouth. And you are also, all of you, House of Absolute, are also producing a cinematic dance film with Philharmonia Orchestra, right? This July, actually. And you featured in Warrior Queens as a dancer, as a vocalist, and you also co-directed and produced the musical soundtrack. I mean, already I'm on the floor. I'm rolling. People are throwing confetti on me. I'm like, what? Can you tell us a bit more about that film?
It's a huge landmark for us in terms of I would say, just over 10 years that myself and Julia Cheng, director of House of Absolute, have been connecting, conspiring, collaborating, and generating and cultivating not only the actual work itself, but our principles and our ethos and our vision for the collective and for the work that we make. So that whole timeline it's taken to get to where we are now. And, there's been a lot of hard work and a lot of surviving and a lot of fighting and a lot of science and continuing and persevering despite the setbacks and despite not being taken seriously at times or being underestimated. And quite recently, actually, I was just doing my own sort of, I would say, research, reflecting on the themes of being underestimated, because I think it's such a universal experience, and specifically for people of colour and specifically for women. And I was like, what is it about the fact that we get underestimated? What is this really gutturally infuriating and frustrating experience that happens sometimes on a daily, sometimes it's a microscopic, things that being said or being looked at, or, all of these layers that build up to just generally being completely underestimated when, you've spent so much time working your arse off, perfecting your craft, doing research, building your network. You do all of this work and it's still, you're just looked at like someone that's still in, university studying, or, and it's just like, are you crazy? Without obviously, not being egocentric or anything, but to some degree it's like, oh, you actually don't know who we are.
You're not actually paying attention, you're not listening and you're not looking, you're not seeing what is in front of you. And
you're choosing what you want to see and or making the story up as well.
And that's probably based on conditioning again, isn't it? Of being so conditioned to see what you think you see, you don't actually see.
And also the strategy of ignoring, which is a big one in our industry. And so I was kind of just looking into some things, and the thing that really stayed with me was, you have to be a Trojan. And so for me, that's what Warrior Queens, in the crux of it, is really kind of roaring about, is okay, fine, underestimate me. Actually, it's a gift if you underestimate me, because I'm going to get through anyway. And come with all of my ammunition, and I'm going to come with my team and my armor and my tribe and all the strategies and all the resources, and we can take everything down from the inside out. And and it's like, I feel like that is something that we have to be all the time in every space that we enter, and actually being okay with being underestimated, because actually it's a superpower.
Right. Yeah. And I really do think there's an element of that, of this superpower of then they all come out, all your flinces, or you know what I mean? But then like suddenly there you are. Yeah. On the main stage as well. It's just like,
So yeah, we feel very proud of the work we've done to get to this point, because it has been very challenging. But I'm glad that we've got to this point, because it shows that our strength and our power and our focus and our determination pays off as well. So yeah, hoping that, well, believing, not just hoping, believing and knowing that this is the beginning of more steps taken forwards, of expanding growth.
Absolutely.
Even more.
Yeah. Next stop, international tour for that piece, by the way. I've already seen it. I've already had the visions. I was like, yep, can't wait. And that's just one tiny piece of the puzzle, I'm sure.
And I so want to bring you back on to talk about, back on PowerUp podcast, to talk about, first of all, like, you know, you said these are the experiences so far, like the kind of continuation of your journey of discovery, but also like just your about 1 million skills that you have. Like, just can we unpick like, some of those at some point?
Will you come back?
Of course I will. Even if you want to just talk about plushies and herbal teas.
Yes!
Cacao and speaking fairy and all the other things, all the other magic.
Thank you so much, Ffion. This has been too short. Somehow all the time's gone, but it's been extremely sweet, and it's been extremely valuable and extremely precious and sacred and informative.
Inspiring.
Yeah, super inspiring. And we hope that you listeners also feel the same, because this is a bloody gift, man.
There it is. Am's bloody.
Thank you for listening. You can connect to us and our guests via the links in each episode's show notes. Before you go, we invite you to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the goodness to come. And if you enjoyed today, perhaps tell a friend to tell a friend. We are always grateful for you, our listeners, for our fabulous guests, and to everyone who has contributed to and been a part of our journey here.
Our music is by Tomo Carter. Everything else is brought to you by us, the PowerUp Power Team.
I'm Mesma.
I am AmaRouge. And we are PowerUp Podcast.